The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Friday, May 24th. I hope everybody is having had a fantastic week. Looking forward to a great weekend, and I've got a busy week next week. I'm off to Florida, but more on that in a minute. Let me just say, okay, today, what we're going to do today, we've got the news segment. We're going to talk about the ICJ ruling on Israel. We're going to talk about a speech made by Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and then we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff about the ignorance of Americans regarding economics and some other polling, interesting polling numbers about what Americans seem to value and what they don't value, but also their knowledge of economics. We will talk about more government spending, obsession on meat, artificial meat, fake meat. And it's not fake if you build it. Anyway, we'll see. We'll talk about a bunch of stuff. Then I'll take your questions, and then we will talk about money. It's a good topic, right? Money. So we have a sponsor for that part of the show. David from Costa Rica is sponsoring that. So we'll talk about everything from what fiat money is, when was it invented, is it good? Is it bad? Maybe I'll try to steal man Keynes, at least in this dimension, with regard to fiat money. We'll talk about a bunch of other things, about a bunch of other financial products, what they are, how they work, my evaluation of them as investments, and my estimate for inflation for the next 12 months, for whatever value that is, I'm not sure. Yeah, that is what we're going to talk about. So pretty straightforward, but that should be fun. So that'll be money. We'll see how long it takes. It'll get me into the mode of thinking, into the mode of discussion for next week, where I am going to Florida, where I will be taping in front of a live audience. So you guys, just a reminder, you guys can still be part of the live audience. Definitely. You can still be part of the live audience if you want to. There is still room. You can come. It's Tuesday and Wednesday next week. I'm going to put the link down here in the chat. And if you're not sure, then Miroslav has already put the link down. You can click on that link. You can sign up for it, right? And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's 8 hours on finance, 4 hours on Tuesday, 4 hours on Wednesday. It's the whole day. It's basically from 9-something in the morning till 4-something p.m. We've got a lunch break and everything, so bring some lunch with you. Come hang out. It should be a lot of fun. So love to have you. We've got an audience already. I'd like it to be bigger. So if you can afford to take 2 days off and you live in South Florida, come on over. It'll be a lot of fun. Let's see what else. Yes, I'm doing that on finance. So today's talk on money will get me kind of revved up and going. I'm doing at least one class in the finance class on money. It won't be structured the way this one is, because this is structured really for David and his questions. But it's getting me thinking about the issues and how to present them, and we will talk about that. What else? I think that's it. I think we're ready to roll. So please, if you're here live, click on Miroslav's link. If you're interested in attending the class next week, you can email me if you're not sure. Yaron@yaronbrookshow.com. I'm surprised more people don't take advantage of this. I'm just giving you my email, yaron@yaronbrookshow.com. And, but the link is Yaron Brook, just my name, Yaron Brook, no gap, .paperform, yaronbrook.paperform.co. yaronbrook.paperform.co, and you can sign up there for it. I think Peterson Academy has just changed their website, so I think they're about to launch. Last I heard, launch was going to be May 31st. Now, the launch will not have my material. The launch will be a bunch of stuff they've been recording for a year, and they'll be releasing it. My material will probably come out late summer, maybe in the fall. The capitalism course, and then after that, the finance course. But it is available. If you come and participate as an audience member, you do get, I think, 1 year free of Peterson Academy. I think Peterson Academy is like $40 a month, something like that, to be able to see all the videos on there. So you can do that. No, of course, it's not being live streamed. This is exclusive material for the Peterson Academy. But Jay, you can fly down to Miami and participate live and watch it in the audience. It will be on the Peterson Academy website once they launch. Well, not once they launch, but after they launch. At some point, they'll release it. They do a lot of, I'm told, they do a lot of post-production. They put in images, they create nice graphics, they make it look super slick and beautiful, and that takes them a few months. And of course, they're taping a course, at least one course every single week. So they're producing dozens of courses, in a constant flow, and I just hope, these two that they produce, and maybe we can get them to do a couple of courses every few months. So it'll be great if I can just get material up there relating to, well, you know what it relates to, relating to reality, truth. But reality and interesting topics, and that we can cover. Free markets, capitalism, all of that good stuff. All right, what else? What else do we want to? I think we can jump into the news. Let's jump into the news. Unfortunately, there's no good news, at least not coming out of the Middle East. So the International Court of Justice today, or maybe it should be renamed the International Court of Injustice today, ruled that Israel must, I mean, I guess they have some jurisdiction over Israel, they must stop fighting in Rafah. I don't know what the obsession is with Rafah. Why is Rafah different than any other part of Gaza Strip? But the media and the United States, really, the Biden administration, made Rafah some kind of litmus test, some kind of test and everything. So, the International Court of Justice told the Israelis they have to stop fighting in Rafah, and they have to evacuate. They have to leave Rafah and the Gaza Strip generally. They have been deemed in violation of the order that the International Court of Justice issued in January, telling Israel to be very cautious as they proceed with their mission not to kill civilians. It turns out Israel has killed civilians. What a shock. They're fighting in a built-up area. What a shock that some civilians are getting killed. And anyway, International Court of Justice basically said, Israel, you have to stand down. You cannot fight. And by the way, as an aside, Hamas, you have to free the hostages. And it's like, my view is, no. I mean, what really the International Court of Justice should say is, Hamas, surrender immediately to the Israeli authorities, and then Israel should consider leaving the Gaza. This is not about hostages. I mean, hostages are awful, horrible, terrible, but this is not about hostages. This is about a regime, Hamas, a government, Hamas, that not only has been cruel and oppressive and just an unmitigated disaster to its own people. I guess we can live with that because it's only their own people that are suffering. But it has been homicidal, genocidal towards Israel, that is committed to Israel's destruction and has killed hundreds of Israelis in the process, including raped, tortured, slaughtered, butchered civilians. And this war is about the destruction of that regime, the destruction of Hamas, the complete annihilation of Hamas so they can never pose a threat to Israel. That's what this is about. Nothing else should satisfy. And yes, if that can be done while freeing the hostages, good. But sadly, but truthfully, hostages cannot come first. You cannot say, okay, if you release the hostages, we'll withdraw and we'll leave you alone, because what about the next hostages? And what about the next murdering out, rampage that they go through? Why are those victims, it's okay? All right, so basically, the Biden administration and the Europeans and the global left, the left worldwide, wants to see Israel lose. They want to see Israel humiliated. They want to see the Palestinians, and in this case Hamas, successful. They want to see Jewish blood in the streets. Or at least they don't mind if Jewish blood is flowing in the streets, because the Jews are the oppressors and the Jews are just Jews. So who cares? So that's what the ICG ruled. Israel, I don't think, has come out yet this morning with a formal statement with regard to this, but I think the informal statement is a middle finger. I think the informal statement was, according to the Palestinians in Gaza, was that as soon as the news broke that the ICG had made this statement, Israeli planes were in the air bombing targets in Rafah. So Israel gave its answer. And I think they did it more diplomatically than I'm going to say it, but they basically said, to hell with you, go to hell. We are going to do what we believe is necessary in order to defend ourselves, and we do not recognize the jurisdiction, or I think they should say this, we do not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICG over us. We will not sacrifice ourselves and our children's life because some ICG ruling. We will not lay down our arms until the Hamas is completely destroyed and completely neutralized. Now, whether Israel puts it in those terms or not, I don't know. But that's basically what Israel is saying. Israel is not going to listen to ICG. It's not going to lay down its arms. It's already fighting way too weakly, compromisingly, and sacrificially. But at least it's fighting. I don't think it's going to stop fighting, in spite of all the European countries ganging up on Israel. It's not going to stop fighting, at least not for now. Now, but there's a heavy cost for what the ICG is doing. There's a heavy cost for what Spain, Ireland, and Norway have done by recognizing the Palestinian state in the midst of all of this. Heavy price, and part of that price you can tell from a speech by Nasrallah. Nasrallah is basically the head of Hezbollah. He's been the head of Hezbollah for decades now. He is a cleric who lives in a bunker in Beirut. He is the spiritual, but also the military leader in every sense. You could call him the supreme leader of Hezbollah. Hezbollah basically runs Lebanon, or much of Lebanon. Also underreported in American media is the fact that pretty much every day there is a kind of a tit-for-tat going on between Israel and Hezbollah, where Hezbollah shoots rockets into Israel. Israel responds by killing Hezbollah members or destroying their infrastructure, and then they shoot rockets into Israel, and Israel responds. And this has been going on now for 7 months, and it continues. Just this morning, Israel killed a high-ranking Hezbollah member, very high-ranking in southern Lebanon, in his car. But there were enough high-ranking members that Israel could keep killing, and one a day, and it would take years to get rid of all of them. Anyway, this is going back and forth. Hezbollah is a major significant power in the Middle East. In this region, they have military experience by fighting in the Syrian civil war. They have been well armed and well supplied by the Iranians for decades now. They have vast arrays of missiles. At the beginning of the war, they were estimated to have over 140,000 missiles that could hit Israel. So these missiles are, they haven't used them all. They clearly, Hezbollah does not want a full-out, all-out war with Israel. So they are being moderate. They haven't gone all out, but they have done enough that northern Israel's basically been evacuated from civilian population. Israel's also afraid of an October 7th on the northern border, where Hezbollah just storms the border and takes civilian population centers or villages or towns. So Israel's evacuated those towns, which is tragic because a lot of people are living in hotels away from their home, and that's just wrong and unfair. Israel should have, as I said on day one after October 7th, Israel should have taken care of southern Lebanon and Hezbollah in the first few days, but it hasn't. Anyway, Nasrallah, who is the leader of the Hezbollah, basically made a speech today, a major speech. He talked all in the memory of the wonders of the great leadership of what do you call it? The great leadership of Raisi, the president of Iran that was just killed. But I'm looking for somehow I hit a button and the story disappeared on me about the speech of Nasrallah, which you can't find again on American media. It's almost impossible to find. So I found it from an Israeli source. But anyway, Nasrallah. No, that's not it either. God. Sorry, guys. 1 second. I will have it. It's a challenge of the technology jumping all over the place. There it is. All right. So Nasrallah gave a speech. He gives a speech from some secure location because he's very afraid of being assassinated by the Israelis. He spent the first hour praising the president of Iran, who just died in the helicopter crash. And then he spent the next 30 minutes explaining to the audience, which is vast, because it's an audience all over the Muslim world, explaining to them why militant uprisings are the only way to achieve anything, and why any negotiations are futile and should be rejected. He basically said, look, do you think that Spain and Norway and Ireland would have recognized a Palestinian state if October 7th had never happened? If Israel's response to October 7th had not been so weak? The reality is that it's only October 7th that made it possible, that made it legitimized, and then incentivized these Western countries to recognize a Palestinian state. Of course, he's right. So it wasn't any wonderful, peaceful, brilliant negotiating stance of the Palestinian Authority. It wasn't because of the charm or the diplomacy of a Palestinian envoy. These countries recognized the Palestinian state, which, again, the Arab world views as a major achievement because of October 7th, because we proved to the world that we could take on the Israelis, because of what Israel is doing in Gaza, which we forced them to do. He said, look at the world. Everywhere in the world, all over the world, there are vast demonstrations that are pro-Palestinian. I mean, there are sit-ins in American universities. American universities don't know how to deal with this. There's such big, passionate, robust demonstrations. What for? What's the cause? The Palestinian cause. Why now, he says. Why, after 75 years of trying to get the world's attention about the Palestinian cause, why now has this become an international cause? Why now has this had such a huge impact? Why kids, students, faculty members in universities all over the world demonstrating for the Palestinians? And he said, because we've shown them how powerful we are. We've shown them we're willing to fight. He said, none of that would have happened if not for October 7th. The only path to getting the world's attention, the only path to getting the world on our side, the only path to getting the world really excited about us, only path to doing that is through violence, is through standing up to the Israelis and fighting them and forcing them to fight us. He said, it's October 7th. And he says, in the speech, he says, and the demonstrations were immediately after October 7th. I mean, I will say, it's not even when Israel entered Gaza. It's even before that. As soon as the Palestinians showed they were willing to kill, slaughter, butcher, rape, torture 1,200 Israelis and kidnap well over 200. It's when people in the West see that, they go, oh, wow, we admire the Palestinians. They're really dedicated to the cause. Wow, we should support them. Because on October 8th, you remember that the 30-something Harvard student organizations that came out with a letter condemning Israel and supporting the Palestinians on October 8th. It wasn't when Israel started bombing. It wasn't when Israel invaded Gaza. It was after Palestinians butchered, raped, tortured 1,200 Israelis. That's what got the world excited. That's what rallied the world to the Palestinian side. That's what Nasrallah says. I mean, he doesn't quite say it the way I say it, but that's certainly the implication of his speech. And he says, what do we learn from this? We learn from this that we must not negotiate. We learn from this that it's not about diplomacy, it's not about lobbying, it's not about convincing, it's not about talking. Only one thing works. The world understands only one thing. We can only get the West's attention by doing one thing. And that is killing Israelis, killing Jews, fighting. He says only a military solution is possible. And of course, he gave this speech right after the ICJ's announcement condemning Israel and demanding it stop fighting in Gaza. And he says, look, October 7th is a massive success. He says, we have never reached a position where world opinion, including its institutions, are so opposed to the state of Israel. October 7th is a huge success. Hamas is still alive. Hamas is still operating. Its leaders still sit in comfort in Qatar. Its military leaders, the number 1 and number 2 leaders in Gaza, haven't been killed. The Gazan population, is still intact. Yeah, a lot of infrastructure was destroyed. But somebody will pay for that. I'm not too worried about that. People's lives have been disrupted, but that's all for a good cause, he will say. Hezbollah is still intact. Yes, 300-something Hezbollah members have been killed. Not a big deal. People are interchangeable. We can get new ones. We can get new volunteers. The reality is the world is turned against Israel, not against Hamas, not against the Palestinians. The lesson every monster in the world is learning, the lesson every monster in the world is learning right now, is that the West sides with murderous barbarism and will abandon the civilized, will abandon the good, will abandon self-defense. And the murderous barbarians know it. And they're waiting. And they're coming for you. They really are. It's this weakness. It's the weakness of the West with regard to Israel, with regard to Ukraine, with regard to every conflict they face, with regard to the way they treat Muslim immigrants within their own borders. It is this weakness that is emboldening every evil monster out there in the world to come after you. And they're going to come after you. Just look at what at the Chinese war games that they're engaged in right now in surrounding Taiwan. They wouldn't dare do anything like this if they feared the West. If they thought the West would unequivocally stand with Taiwan or with anybody if attacked. If they thought that initiating force would be severely punished. Nasrallah, the barbarian in charge of the Shiites outside of Iran, is at the forefront of this. Right? And they don't fear America, and it doesn't matter who president is. They don't fear Europe. They don't fear anybody at this point because they see who and what we are, and they see that clearly. And anybody who thinks that President Trump would be significantly different is delusional. Trump would be running and groveling to make a deal, writing love letters to the dictators of all these countries. Maybe he'd go and shake Nasrallah's hand and ask for let's cut a deal, let's make a deal. I mean, what's shocking about this is how the extent to which they understand it and they're willing to say it. And certainly Nasrallah did this morning. All right, so that's an update from the Middle East. Nothing good. Well, and from The Hague, not just from the Middle East, but The Hague. Yeah, anyway. The West is really, it really is discouraging. And the number of countries that have come out and said that they support the ICC if they issue arrest warrants against Israeli leaders, they will live up to those warrants. They will fulfill those warrants. Just unbelievable. I will give credit. We'll see if this actually happens. But the Biden administration has floated the idea of basically sanctioning ICC members. They've also floated the idea that it looks like that if the ICJ, who doesn't have any enforcement power over Israel, but can take it to the Security Council and try to force Israel to retreat from Rafah. And Israel, the Biden administration, it seems like, has suggested they would veto such a thing. We'll see if that's actually the case, but they did say they would veto. So as bad as the Biden administration is on this issue, it's just nowhere near as bad as our so-called European allies are. It really is bad. All right. Some interesting survey data from a bunch of Harris polls. I think is interesting in terms of Americans' attitudes towards a bunch of different things. Actually, let's start with maybe some of the more positive elements of this, although I don't know if you want to really call them positives, but just interesting. These are just interesting aspects. So there's been a Harris poll both on economic issues and economic understanding and everything like that, but also on favorability. So, for example, Americans right now, this is shocking, but it doesn't surprise me because Americans are both ignorant and have very short memories, and not just Americans, generally people. Americans have a very favorable, a relatively favorable attitude of Donald Trump right now. A 50% favorable. Now, when he was president, he barely made it over 42%, I think, favorability ratings. He was mostly around 40 and under 40. But people have forgotten how awful he was as president. And they now have a positive favorability rating of him as 40, and his unfavorable rating, which used to be well over 50%, is now only 46. So he has a net positive favorability rating. This is Donald Trump. RFK, just to give you a sense of the American people, RFK has a much larger gap between favorable and unfavorable. 46% have a favorable view, 36 unfavorable. In other words, a plus 10. This is the nutcase, Robert Kennedy, who was a complete nut. DeSantis, 43-37, so plus 6. A better plus than Trump, but less people know who he is, so less people are even voting in a sense. Let's see, Elon Musk, 48-35, so very high plus minus, plus 13. Who do Americans not like? I mean, so here you go. Americans don't like this. This should make those of you who fear the left as day, right? So they hate Chuck Schumer, -12. They hate OAC, -15. They hate Hunter Biden, -34. Indeed, they hate Joe Biden, -10. 43 favorable, 53 unfavorable. Cornel West has a negative. Jill Stein has negative. Ilhan Omar has a -22. She's the most disliked person. Rashida Tlaib has a -18. So people on the right generally, Marco Rubio +3, Tim Scott +10, Vivek +6, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, +6, Doug Burgum who's I'm surprised anybody knows who he is, +5. Those are all Republicans. DeSantis, as I said, +6. Kamala Harris, -8. Hillary Clinton, -8. Like every single one of the Democrats here is massively negative. Republicans are positive. So the country generally has a more positive view of Republicans than negatives, than Democrats. What institutions do Americans have a favorable view of? U.S. military, +72. 82 favorable, 10 unfavorable. U.S. military, +72. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, to be that positive about an institution of force worries me. I don't have that positive a view of the military. Not after Afghanistan. And I don't just blame the politicians for that. I blame the generals for that. I'd say I have a mildly negative view of the American military. So it's stunning that they have a +72. Police, +56. So you love the police. 75th favorable, 19 unfavorable. FBI, 57 favorable, 33 unfavorable, 24 plus 24. The next one is a shocker. American people have a favorite attitude towards Ukraine. Go figure. +53 to 27. Israel, 53 to 26. Supreme Court, 51 to 38. What do they have a negative view of? Again, all the leftist causes, right? Well, except MAGA Republicans, -3. But Campus protesters, negative 32. Palestinian Authority, negative 30. China, negative 44. Antifa, negative 33. Hamas, negative 51. CNN, break even. MSNBC, break even. Black Lives Matter, break even. But like even Fox News has a better favorability. What are the two biggest concerns that Americans have in their life? Inflation, price increases, and immigration. And immigration. By far. Nothing else comes close. Economy and jobs is third. Crime and drugs fourth. National death and healthcare and women's rights all are tied for fifth. And it goes down. Guns is pretty low. Defense very low. Civil disorder very low. Anti-Semitism very low. Almost all of these. Even weaponization of the Justice Department, which is a big Trump thing, very low. They're not concerned about these things. They're really concerned about inflation, immigration, a little bit economy and jobs, and crime and justice. That's it. So, indeed, if Trump focused on inflation and immigration and stopped complaining about his lost election and his trials and all that stuff, I find it hard to believe he doesn't win as a consequence. In terms of what affects you personally, actually has an impact on you. Number one is inflation. What is interesting is 16% of Americans say they're personally impacted by immigration, which I think is bullshit. I don't think I'll call them on that. I'd like to find those 16% that are actually impacted by immigration. I don't believe that's true. And of course, many more Republicans are impacted directly by immigration. Very few Democrats are, which is kind of interesting. Whereas with inflation, it's both parties. Everybody's affected by inflation. All right, so there you have that series of poll numbers, which I find interesting. It really does. If I had to draw conclusions for that, I would draw the conclusion that what the American people are fed up of is chaos. They're fed up with, violence and, disorder. They're fed up with both crime. They rank very low people like Intifada and others who engage in what they perceive as chaos. They also engage. They also what do you call it? Tend because of that. Oh, and of course they're very concerned about the economy. They're very concerned about inflation. We'll get to that in a minute. And as a consequence, if I add it all up, it seems a very favorable environment for Republicans. It should be very favorable to Republicans as we move in through the election season. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out ultimately in how people vote. Based on those questions and the answers to those questions, it's perfect storm for Trump. And really, it should be a perfect storm for Republicans. Republicans are very good at shooting themselves in the kneecaps, but Republicans should gain significantly in this next election, certainly in the Senate. So interesting. Abortion doesn't come up here. Not as a major issue. I think it is for a very highly motivated subpopulation, young women, but they could be in an election, particularly for a House seat, they could be the electorate that tilts the election. All right, let's talk about people's attitude towards the economy. This one's a little funny because, unsurprising to anybody who actually follows and tracks the American public, asking them questions about the economy reveals that they are unbelievably ignorant. They're just ignorant. And again, I blame the intellectuals. I blame the people in media. I blame, the bubbles that people live inside of, where they are told stories that comfort them and maybe reassure their tribe that what's happening in reality is consistent with their tribal beliefs, pre-beliefs. So here's some stuff. 55% of Americans, according to this survey, believe the economy is shrinking. But it's not, right? It's not exactly a robust recovery, but by every objective measure, the economy is growing. It's growing. Maybe it's not growing for them specifically, but the economy is growing. That's what they were asked about. 56% of Americans think the U.S. is experiencing a recession. Again, not. Hasn't been a recession in a long time. Had 1 quarter of negative growth last year. Other than that, nothing. By every broad measure of the economy is growing. Again, not exciting, but growing. So Action Jackson just said, if someone's super chat gets over 50 likes, I will gift a membership. So you can like a super chat now. And I nominate Adam Campbell's super chat for you to like, because it's a $50 super chat question. So if you like that, then Action Jackson will gift a membership. And of course, don't forget, you can gift memberships too through the $ over there where you do the super chat. You can also gift memberships. Anyway, so Americans don't have any concept of what's actually going on in the economy. 49%, here's a clear objective one. 49% believe the S&P 500 stock market index is down for the year. Although the index, of course, was up 24% in 2023 and is up 12% this year. 49% believe that unemployment is at a 50-year high. High. Unemployment, the 50-year high. Though the unemployment rate has been under 4%, a near 50-year low. So, of course, people are concerned about the economy and jobs. They don't have any clue about what's actually going on. They really are unbelievably ignorant. They just don't know. And these people vote. They vote in spite of the fact that they're clueless. Now, maybe it's fine for them to be clueless, but then maybe they shouldn't vote or stay home. Vast majority of respondents, 72%, think that inflation is increasing. In reality, inflation has fallen from a post-COVID peak of 9.1% to somewhere between 3 to 4% this year. In April, inflation rate went down from 3.5 to 3.4. Again, far from the 9.1% in June 2022. So they don't even know what's happening with inflation. They think it's higher. 58% of respondents blame Biden for the state of the economy, which they think is horrible, right? And for inflation. Ignoring the fact that the first big helicopter money stimulus was done under Trump. That Trump basically supported the big helicopter money stimulus that Biden did when he first came into office, and Republicans voted for it. They ignore all of that. And the fact that Trump spending was high, ignore all of that. And this is why Trump is viewed favorably, Biden negatively, because of all they remember is what's recent. They also ignore the fact that Trump is promising a massive increase in prices. 10% tariffs across the board and much higher tariffs on certain products is only going to increase prices across the board. And remember that Trump has a history of trying to cajole encourage the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, which could very well bring about more inflation, certainly more spending, and more real economic problems if that indeed happens. But people are ignorant. I mean, this is the problem. It's a problem of democracy. It's why the ideal political system is not a pure democracy. People don't know how the economy is doing. They certainly don't know what would make it better. They certainly have no clue how to improve it. They certainly have no conception of what it would take to improve it. They have no idea. I mean, how many economists know anything about economics? Very few. I just don't think Americans know anything. And this is why you should separate government from economics. This is why you should not make economic issues, economics, something people vote on or something politicians decide on. I mean, it's not the only reason, but it's a reason why you should never you should separate state from economics and let private markets just work, function. The more the government intervenes, the more problems you have, but the more excited voters get. Voters like intervention. They like to feel like somebody's taking care of them. Somebody is addressing their concerns, even if their concerns are ignorant. Somebody is out there, doing something about the problems. They're doing something, even if what they're doing is making the problems worse. All right. I had a bunch of other questions, but I think what we'll do is we'll go to the Super Chat. We'll do the Super Chat, and then we'll come back and talk about money and the history of money, the role of money, fiat money, all of that, which is a topic that was sponsored by David. You too can sponsor a show. It's $1,000 to sponsor a show. You get to determine the topic, the questions I answer, so feel free to write to me at yaron@yaronbrookshow.com to suggest a sponsored topic. But it is scary. It is scary how ignorant people are about economic issues right now, and not just economic issues, political issues generally. And that, of course, opens the door completely to the politicians doing basically whatever they want, and the politicians basically being driven by, ignorance, and politicians basically being driven by, well, it's not ignorance, by power lust, and they can fool the population into believing whatever they want to believe, whatever the politicians want the population to believe. For example, one of the things the poll discovered was that most Americans blame greedy corporations for inflation. So Elizabeth Warren, with her greedflation, repeating it over and over and over again, and some people on the right, in a sense, embracing that or not fighting against it, it's stuck. It's really stuck. And now Americans hold that. They really do hold the idea that we have inflation, not because of monetary policy, not because of government spending, but because of corporations being greedy. Corporations being greedy. All right, let's see. Don't forget Christian's challenge. He said 50 likes. 50 likes is a lot, but 50 likes on. We've already had 21 likes of Adam's If Adam Campbell can get, Super Chat can get 50 likes, you can go now into Super Chat and like a post, like a Super Chat. If we can get that to 50, then Christian is going to donate a membership. Christian, you made it really hard for people because the reality is that 50 likes is a lot. I don't know if we can get there. Adam says, by the way, I couldn't send the Super Chat until I deleted the word Hamas. Isn't that interesting that YouTube won't let you write Hamas? What are they afraid of? I guess they're afraid of me. That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of people telling the truth. They're afraid of people telling the truth. All right. Let's start with Adam's question. It is a $50 question, so let's start with that. All right. The irony is, if Israel took the same strong stance, evil would learn a quick lesson. If you allow evil a free pass, it grows like a weed, and the West is standing still holding Roundup. Absolutely. And it will grow like a weed. They're learning their lessons from Putin's success and from people like Tucker Carlson going and groveling before him and giving a platform, and they're learning from the fact that the Republicans wouldn't approve weapons for Ukraine, and they're learning from the fact that the Americans might give them weapons with the Biden administration that hamstrings the use of those weapons, and then they don't give them the weapons they actually need. They give them the weapons that are least going to offend the Russians. Basically, any bad guy sitting on the sideline watching this is going, the West is pretty weak. They're pretty scared. They've got the best weapons in the world. They've got the best military in the world, the best capabilities in the world, and they're scared. They're scared. And China knows that, and North Korea knows that. And look, all of this is, they've learned that Trump was the kind of president who goes and hugs and meets and celebrates a relationship with a thuggish, murderous, homicidal maniac like the dictator of North Korea. Biden is the kind of president that retreats from Afghanistan with his tail between his legs. Of course, after Trump signed a peace treaty with the Taliban. Yeah. And tried to negotiate another deal with Iran in the background. So they know, they realize, they see. It doesn't matter who the president is. They're all weaklings. They're all compromisers. They're all appeasers. And they can get away with anything. They can get away with anything. And as a consequence, they are just, the next few years are going to be much more dangerous than the last few years. That's the consequence. Adam's Super Chat is up to 29 likes. So we just need 21 more likes to get a gifted membership by Christian. So, consider doing that. All right. I see the chat it looks like it improved. It looks like it's much easier to respond to somebody's chat. You can respond directly to comments, and you can respond to super chats, and it just looks like they've added features and they've made it better, which is great. All right, give me 1 second. Be right back. All right, let's do Johamian. Joe Hamian. Oh, okay, it's just Joe Hamian. God, why am I trying to overdo it? All right. Joe Hamian. Joe Hamian. Joe knew that I wouldn't pronounce his name right, so he actually gave me the pronunciation below, which is very considerate. Thank you. I like it when people anticipate my weaknesses and just let me know how to deal with them. All right. This happens a lot at work. People say sarcastically, having fun yet? Any advice on how to respond without me having to deliver a full lecture on the value of productivity? Yeah, I mean, I would say something like, I actually like my job. This is fun. Or, yeah, this is about the most fun I have. And you know, kind of with a little bit of energy. So, you know, working and making money and being productive, that's kind of cool. I think that's kind of cool. So yeah, thank you for asking. I am having fun. I don't know, any one of those. Just project positivity. You don't have to give them a lecture. I think if you project that, they might one day come to you and say, how come you like work? And then you can give them a whole lecture on productivity and productiveness and why it's important and what values you find in it. So that would be, I think that's the way to approach something like this. Thank you, Joe. Andrew, how do you think the cynicism in the culture affects politics? Well, I think that it makes people susceptible to anything that's anti-principles. It makes them susceptible to pragmatism. It makes them susceptible to fear. It makes them susceptible to being manipulated. I think one of the appeals, I put that in quotes, of Donald Trump is that he's not principled. He doesn't have the same shtick that everybody else has. He, quote, calls it like it is. He doesn't. I mean, he basically is figuring out what his audience wants to hear and he gives it to him. But that's their sense because he says it in language and in words and with style that is not of a thinker or of a conventional politician. And that's what they admire and like. So cynicism promotes skepticism of any principle, of any of ideas. And what it encourages people is to be attracted to anybody who wants to smash the status quo. And they don't want to hear a principled argument against the status quo. They don't want to hear, well, these are my principles that would undermine the status quo. They want the status quo smashed. And that's all they really care about. So, yeah, I would say that is how cynicism plays its way into politics. Harper Campbell. People have a fetish for conciliatory conversations. They want this big kumbaya. They aren't confident enough to identify that there is evil and it needs to be done away with, and if the good is just to flourish in the world. I mean, I think that's absolutely right, and it has to do with the fact that people are afraid, unwilling to make moral judgments. They evaluate people morally. To say that person is a bad person. Oh, don't say that. Who are you to judge? Don't be so judgmental. Right? Don't judge lest you be judged yourself. Christianity teaches us that. So there's a real fear of judging, of acknowledging the fact that some people are bad. I think maybe it's because they're afraid of being judged themselves. Maybe it's just a consequence. It's a consequence of moral relativism, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. But yes, I think that it's these conciliatory conversations, kumbaya, let's all get along. is a fear of judgment, a fear of being judged, a fear of judging. It's very difficult to get moral clarity. It's very difficult to get that with any kind of certainty. People behaving as if there was moral certainty. Andrew, despite being pro-Second Amendment, the libertarians and isolationist MAGA types have an anti-self-defense streak. Why? Well, I don't know if they have an anti-self-defense streak. They have a anti-self-defense streak when it comes to countries, when it comes to good countries, because they have they're anti-American, because they're anti-Israeli, because they're anti-good countries, good states, because so they are pro-self-defense when it comes to, I think, individual self-defense. What they're against is Israel's right to defend itself. Well, but it's complicated. Israel's done some horrible things. All states are evil. It's very much a Rothbardian BS type attitude, and it's all focused on foreign policy. And you get the same thing in the MAGA or the New Right, where it's, Russia, the good guys, because they're more authoritarian, they're stronger, they're more manly. Israel can be right, can be good because they're Jews, because America supports them. A lot of money goes there. Well, we're against America supporting anybody. So it's kind of convoluted. The whole thing is convoluted, but it's centered on hatred of good countries, partially because anarchy at least teaches you should hate all countries, right? So you should just hate the state. Hate the state. Don't judge the state, just hate the state. Liam says, we associate socialism with Plato, but aren't anarcho-capitalists just as Platonic? They deal in these abstract Platonic forms, logic divorced from perception. Is Plato the reason almost everyone lives in their head? Yes, it's definitely Plato, and you say, but I think the argument that objectivists certainly make is that there is no big difference between socialism and anarcho-capitalists. And anarcho-capitalists are fundamentally collectivists, and they ultimately must and do ultimately fold into some kind of authoritarianism. That individualism, respect for the individual, rejection of collectivism and therefore socialism, relies on, from a political perspective, relies on the existence of a concept of individual rights and therefore on a monopoly over the use of retaliatory force to protect those rights, to retaliate against those who violate those rights. And without that, there is no freedom. There is no liberty. All right, James Taylor. In a modern industrial context, would you regard not teaching a child reading, writing, arithmetic child abuse? You can't have the freedom to raise a wolf child. Should the government mandate basic education? I mean, this is a tough one. I think the answer is yes, it should mandate. I think anything short of that, certainly the basics, would be child abuse. But it should not mandate what kind of education, how long that education should be. So it should be pretty loose. But if a child of a certain age can read, write, or do arithmetic, then they should be taken from their parents and put into whatever kind of home where they will be provided with the basic education that their parents are obviously not giving them. It's child abuse. Given humans are conceptual beings, it's child abuse to deny them the basics on which they build a life, without which you cannot build a life in a modern world. I think that is true. I think Leonard Peikoff talks about that on one of his podcasts and mentions this and argues for this. I think it's probably one where you could imagine a debate among objectivists and not everybody agreeing on. But I think there's definitely a credible case to make that, yes, a child has a right to be allowed, basically, to pursue the basics of what it means to be cognitive. Cognitive? I think so. Clark, why do you think people don't look for explanations? They don't see the need to peel that next layer of the onion. Well, they're not curious. They're not interested in reality. They don't think that much. They don't have a lot of trust or esteem in their own mind. They rely on others for most of their knowledge and for facts out there. And therefore, they are lazy intellectually. And, maybe when they were children, every time they asked that why question, their parent knocked them over the head and drove that curiosity out of them, which I think happens. I think a lot of parents try to do that. And some parents succeed. So I think it's that loss of curiosity, which can be driven out of kids with the right kind of miseducation, with the right kind of abuse. Andrew says, Trump is a hater. Haters don't build, as is playing out in his politics. Yet Trump was a builder by profession. Any thoughts on that apparent dichotomy? No, I mean, I think Trump viewed building as the way he made a living. He was born into the real estate business. He inherited the business from his father. I don't think he viewed it as build per se. I also think, I'm pretty sure Trump has deteriorated over time, has become worse. Was he a hater 20 years ago, 30 years ago? In the 80s, he was already weird and had some bad ideas, but was he as much of a hater as he is today? I don't know that he's a builder today. So I just don't think that it's that simple. People are also very good at compartmentalizing and keeping their build mentality in one compartment and their hating mentality in another compartment. So I don't think it's simple. This guy's a hater, therefore he'll never produce anything and he'll never build anything. I don't think reality works that way. All right, Stephen Harper, thank you for the sticker. Chirilu, something like that. Thank you for the super sticker, for the sticker. Who else did a sticker? Maybe nobody. Robert Nasser did a sticker early on, so thank you, Robert. Thank you, guys, for the stickers. Don't forget to use the super chat to ask questions. Use the stickers to support the show without a question. Don't forget that one of the ways you can support the show right now is by gifting memberships. You can go in where the super chat feature is. You can click on it, and you can gift membership. And the algorithm decides who to gift the membership to. Don't know on what basis it decides it. But it is kind of cool. And a lot of people are very thankful for the membership that they are gifted. By the way, if 50 people like Adam Campbell's super chat, which I've already answered, but it's in your stream, then we will get a membership gifted by Christian. We're 33, so we need 17 people to go to Adam Campbell's super chat and press the like button. You can now like particular super chats, which is kind of cool. We could actually have up votes and down votes of different super chat questions and see who wins. Right now, Adam's winning because it's a means to an end. Adam's question is a means to an end, not just to my answer, which is one end, but the other end is a membership gift. All right, J-Dog. It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Henry Ford. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what year he said that. It would be interesting to figure out what year he said that and what his view on the appropriate monetary system was. I'm generally suspicious of Henry Ford. You have to remember he was somewhat enamored by the Nazis, and his political views, I don't think, were very, very well educated. All right, let's see. Thank you, J-Dog. J-Dog also says, belated birthday wishes. Thank you. Thank you. Yesterday was my birthday, for those of you who don't know. And we did really, really well on the Super Chat yesterday. Thank you to all the Super Chatters. So we made our goal and we exceeded it. So hopefully we can do the same today and the day after my birthday. Don't let it drop off. Don't let it die. Keep the energy going. Buster Jones, I'm pretty sure the argument against attacking Rafah amounts to being anti-victory in warfare. If Rafah falls, the anti-Israeli ideal vanishes too. Well, I don't know if that's true. Rafah will fall. There's no question it will fall. I hope the fall of Rafah actually means victory. That is yet to be seen. Israel has not been very good at actually dismantling, destroying, incapacitating completely Hamas. So we will see if Rafah will be different. And I think the anti-Israeli ideal stays alive no matter what, partially because Israel didn't do enough of a job to shake it out of people. And it's well ingrained, and partially because now it's been institutionalized. The anti-Israeli ideal has been institutionalized in the ICC and ICJ. It's been institutionalized in Ireland and in Spain and in Norway by their actions, by their statements. Tom says, and the silence on Russia is deafening. Yes. I mean, how many people are talking about how evil Putin and what is going on in China really is? And they're just constant bombarding and attacking and destroying and murdering civilians in Ukraine. Nobody cares. Nobody seems to care. Where's that? Although the ICC does have an arrest warrant for Putin. But they're not doing more than that because they know they don't have an impact on Russia. And because they don't want to deal with Russia. They'd much rather go after the Jews. Michael, defeating Hamas appears to be a violation of international law. You're only allowed to say you have a right to defend yourself. When you actually do it, we have to stop you. Yes, absolutely. I mean, you have a right to retaliate, but not retaliate enough so as to defeat your enemy. It's like, this is fair, proportionality. They killed 1,200 of your people. Okay, so you can go in and maybe kill 2,000 of theirs. And maybe if they kill 3,000 next time, you can kill 4,000 of theirs. But you can't kill a lot more than that. That's completely disproportionate. All they killed was 1,200 of yours. And you have bigger weapons and worse weapons. That's not fair. So maybe you should give them big, powerful weapons before you attack them next time to make it more equal footing and more fair. We should start a movement, fairness in warfare. We should give our enemies weapons that are equal to ours so that we can have a fair fight. And this is so embedded in altruism. It's so embedded that if you think about Westerns, when the good guy has an opportunity to shoot the bad guy in the back, he never does it. No, he's going to give the bad guy every opportunity to kill him. So they're going to meet at high noon and have a duel rather than just killing the bad guy and getting rid of him. Pretty interesting how that mentality of a fair fight that comes from the Middle Ages has become institutionalized in the doctrine of war and in the doctrine of how you fight evil. And again, it partially comes from a lack of willingness to declare an equivocally moral judgment. If I declare you evil, and I make the case that you're evil, then people will view you shooting evil in the back as more acceptable. But if I'm afraid to declare you evil, then God, that seems so unfair. At least give him a shot. Let him try to beat you. Terrific. Thank you, Michael. All right, Andrew, hear me out on why I don't like the term judge for the virtue. A judge is typically used in a conflict, a negative, but objectivist view of judgment is to prioritize the good. Any comment on that, and that the judging is not just for identifying faults? Yeah, I mean, I think that judgment and judging and justice come before the term judge. And there's nothing about judgment and justice that suggests that it's just a negative. And even, so it is true that we primarily use judge and judgment, and even justice. The justice, I mean, you can't use justice either, because the justice system is a system of negatives. It's not about rewarding the good. The justice system is about penalizing bad, not about rewarding good. So the whole orientation, the whole framework in which these terms are used, are oriented towards punishing or dealing with conflict and the negative. We should embrace that. We should reject that, and we should say no. The term itself relates to choosing, evaluating based on a standard of value who is good and who is bad. That's what judging means. I mean, you judge a competition, there are winners and losers. So there are all kinds of judges. Judges are not just judges in a court of law. You can also have judges in a competition where you choose the victors, where you choose the virtuous. So I'm not sure if your conception, the way you view judges is completely true. It's not just about conflict, it's just about competition. Andrew, thank you for the $50 question. Really, really appreciate that. We're making nice progress to achieving our goal for the second hour. We achieved our goal for the first hour, $250 for each hour. We are making progress in achieving our goal for the second hour. We're not quite at halfway. We should be very close to halfway. We should be at halfway soon in terms of the entire show, given the show will be about 3 hours. I expect. All right, let's do these quickly, and then we'll get to money. Liam, if someone makes a YouTube channel dedicated to destroying the Yaron Brook Show, shouldn't that earn them an immediate spot on the block list? Yes, if somebody has a channel dedicated to that, if that's the purpose of the channel, show me and I'll block Scott, because I assume that's who you're talking about. But yes, if that's their purpose in the channel that they have, to, in a sense, destroy my show or to undermine my show, then absolutely that is reason enough to block them. So send me a link, send me evidence. Not that they did a show, but that the channel's dedicated to that's what they're dedicating their time, significant time to. Tom, Chinese treatment of the Uyghurs is not Islamophobia. Well, Islamophobia doesn't mean anything. And in a sense, it is fear of Islam. And in China's case, the fear is justified. It's the remedy that is unreasonable. But the fear is justified. China went through a period of significant terrorist attacks by Islamists, by jihadis, from among the Uyghurs and among other Islamic groups in Western China. And its response to that is re-education camps and, prisons, and but without separating out the guilty from the innocent, without the rule of law, without trials, without anything. Just because they're Muslims, they need to be re-educated, they must be bad. So the way they're addressing it is wrong, even though their concern, their fear, if you will, right? The Islamophobia, the fear of Islam, is right. They have a real problem with Islam in the West. And they're bordered on the West with a number of countries where there are Islamist, jihadi groups that would love to undermine the Chinese regime because it's secular or because it's pagan, or because it's non-Muslim. Michael says, can you do a show titled, But What About the Poor? Sure, it would be better if somebody sponsored it. We talked about sponsorships earlier. It would be great if somebody sponsored a show like that. It's only $1,000. Thank you, Michael. Also, Michael, even though you have to enroll in Medicare when you turn 65, can't you choose to only use private insurance? I don't think so. I think you can buy supplemental insurance that adds on top of the Medicare, but I think you still have to, the doctors you see are going to file with Medicare. I think you still have to go through Medicare. Right? So, that is, I don't think you can avoid being treated one way or another as a Medicare patient, even if you have supplemental private insurance. But I might be wrong. I haven't researched this completely. I need to research it more thoroughly. Robin says, they're poor, Yaron. They can't afford to sponsor the show. That is true, but there are plenty of people who listen to this show, whether here live or but particular people who listen to it as a podcast later, who are not poor and who could easily sponsor the show that somebody wants. So if anybody out there wants to sponsor a show on, but what about the poor? How does capitalism deal with the poor, with poverty? Then please, just let me know. We could do easily a show on poverty under capitalism and what about the poor. It would be a good show, but so there's plenty of people out there who have the ability to be able to fund it. All right. I know Robin was kidding, but it's a real question. I mean, he's kidding, but I'm not. Alex's thought: is the world a lost cause? Are you still optimistic? Oh God. I mean, in many respects, it's a lost cause. At least it's a lost cause in the short run. It might also be a lost cause in the medium run. In that sense, I mean 10, 20 years. I don't see what would cause it to get better over the next 10 years, maybe beyond that. Maybe you could imagine something, but I don't see it in the next 10 years. What would actually cause it to get better? I'm still optimistic on the long run. I still think that in the long run, it will get better. Now, what does it mean to be pessimistic? Do I think we're just falling off a cliff here? We're all going to die. World War III. No, although I have my moments. I don't think it's that. I think we're in for stagnation. Although I'm coming more and more to appreciate the possibility that we're heading towards a major economic catastrophe. I rule that out less today than I did even a few weeks ago. Mary Eileen says, no one is as naive as a cynic, said Ayn Rand. No one is as naive as a cynic. I think that's absolutely right. They think they're worldly, but no, they're the most naive of all. Raphael, violation of individual rights means the initiation of physical touching. But we agree that slander and libel laws, do we need a better definition? No, it's a violation of your freedom to pursue your property, to pursue your rights. It's a violation of your ability to act on behalf of, in pursuit of your rights, in pursuit of your property, in pursuit of your interests. And slander is a way to stop you. So is libel. So it's not about physical touching. Physical touching is just an aspect of of violation of individual rights. It's not the defining characteristic of it. Fraud, for example, is not touching. All right, Philosophy at Work says, shout out to Mary Benz. I can see how capitalism would be great for working out one's arms and legs, but what about the core? What? I can see how capitalism would be good for working out one's legs and arms and legs, but what about the core? God, what am I missing? Is this a joke question or I'm missing something? I don't understand what the relationship is between capitalism and one's legs and arms. I guess it's a joke. I'm slow. Andrew, Bill Maher's basic message on his book tour is the left has major problems, but the right is worse. More deeply, his main sentiment is he doesn't want to hate 50% of America, and he doesn't hate them. Thoughts on the message? I mean, I think it's too negative, but what does Bill Maher stand for? Not hating? But some people deserve hate. What does Bill Maher want? What would Bill Maher, what is the message? What's the positive message? And that's a real problem. So while I like Bill Maher on a lot of issues, he doesn't have a positive message. He doesn't have a positive solution. He doesn't have a way to Americans stop each other. He doesn't have a unifying message. He has an anti-left message in some things, an anti-right message in other things, but he doesn't have a pro-anything message. And it's a real challenge. It's a real problem. All right, we are going to move to the section of our our shtick, where we actually talk about money. And we're going to talk about the history of money, where money comes from, and a bunch of topics, some of which have been delineated by David Sassin from Costa Rica, who has sponsored the show. And you guys can sponsor shows too. So before I jump into this, what I'm going to do is I have to tape some ads. So all my shtick about supporting the show on Patreon and all these things, I need to tape that because I think every one of these should have a little break, because I need a break right now, a short one, quickly to recharge energy-wise so I can be fully engaged in the issue around money. Plus, I don't know, I've got some hair that's getting stuck in my eye, which is bothering me. So I'm going to take hopefully a minute, maybe 2-minute break here. I will be right back. I'm going to put on the pre-show. Starting soon is wrong. So I'll just leave it here. And I will be right back with you. And we will return to talking about money. All right, got a fresh bottle of water. I think I'm all set. Let's see. Money. Let's talk about money. So the question really here is the history of money, and its present and its future. So there's a lot to talk about here. But so what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the history, even though the history of money going way back, build it up to a discussion of fiat money, which David certainly wants me to talk about in terms of the questions he's asked about fiat money. We'll talk about gold. We'll talk about the gold standard. We'll also talk about different investment vehicles. I'll say something about Keynes. And we'll see what else we cover. But let's just start with the basics. And it's really, really important to note that money of one form or another has existed. We have evidence that has existed in human civilization for thousands of years. Money certainly goes back to Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia had not just money, but also interest. At a rate of interest, they charged people interest on loans. There was an active lending business. There were money lenders in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is the empire that is in what is today Iraq, Iran, that part of the world. And it's probably maybe the first civilization, together with Egypt, maybe the first civilization that we have. And it's clear, it's the first system of law was Hammurabi's laws, tablets of actual rule of law, of articulations of what the laws are that govern the land. And it's clear in that environment that loans were made. Now, loans were not necessarily made in a monetary unit. Some loans were made in terms of stuff. So you could, for example, loan somebody seeds, and you would demand interest on the seeds. That is, you would expect that they would return the seeds with interest, which means if you gave them 100 seeds, you want back 150 seeds. That would be 50%, or whatever it happens to be. So you can find on these tablets transactions like that and commemorations of that. Now remember, human society, certainly 10, 15,000 years ago, maybe more, was a barter society. You exchange goods for goods, things for things. And of course, exchanging goods for goods is very cumbersome. It's very difficult. It is. How many chickens is a cow? And if I don't have enough chickens, they get half a cow. But half a cow is worth a lot less than half a cow, because a cow is alive, half a cow is dead. So a barter economy is a very, very difficult economy. It's a very slow economy. It's a very inefficient economy. And it's an economy that cannot really grow. It's an economy that cannot really increase in productivity. But productivity is stalled when there is no unit that allows for simplified exchange. And the first money came into being in order to simplify exchange. And that money could have been a lot of different things, right? And indeed, lots of things over the millennia have served as money, from rocks with unique shapes to agricultural products to precious metals. And we just had a membership gifted. Thank you, Apollo Zeus. Nate is the beneficiary of a membership gift from Apollo Zeus. Very nice. So you can imagine that at some point there was something, a precious metal, some kind of a relatively rare and exclusive crop that a lot of people want it. Not everybody needs it, but a lot of people want it, so that I might not want it, but I knew that I could trade it for something one of you want. That one of you wanted, and I could trade it to you for something that I did want. So what you actually got is some means of exchange, some commodity, something that could be used to place a monetary value, to place a price on every good in this primitive economy, so that barter didn't have to happen. Instead, we could use this medium of exchange to move product to whoever wanted it most. And how would you know who wanted it most? The one who was willing to pay the most in this medium of exchange. And a medium of exchange is money. Money is, the definition of money is really the prevalent, the used means of exchange, the thing that we use to get to trade, to facilitate, smooth out a barter system of trade. Right. So a barter system evolved into a money system. A money system is a lot more effective, and ultimately, that money system, organized around two types of money, commodities, basically, silver and gold. And people would literally use gold coins, or gold dust or gold bars. You'd have to weigh it. You'd have to evaluate. The nice thing about coins is you knew its denomination. As long as it wasn't chipped, as long as it was whole, you knew what it was going to weigh, because it came with a stamp that the mint had authorized that this is what it weighed. And so money could be, gold could be used if I wanted to buy your cow or you wanted to buy my chickens. We didn't have to exchange cows for chickens. We just exchanged money for for the commodity or the product or the agricultural product that we needed. And the reason gold evolved or silver evolved is because they were not perishable. You wanted to be able to keep it to use when you needed something. And so in a sense, they needed to be a store of value. And if they perished, they couldn't be a store of value. And they need to be a store of value so that they could be used as a medium of exchange. So they needed to be, they couldn't be perishable. They needed to be relatively rare, so you couldn't just flood the market with them. Because what happens if you flood the market? What happens if there's X amount of gold in this economy being traded, and a certain number of goods, and suddenly somebody brings in, or somebody helicopters, drops from the sky enough gold to double the amount of gold that exists in this economy. Is everybody now richer? Well, not really, because now they have more money to spend on the same goods. They will just bid up the price of those goods. This is what's called price inflation. They'll bid up the price of those goods, and they'll have the same stuff. Now, to the extent that gold is stuff, maybe they're richer because they have more gold. But if gold's primary function is just as a medium of exchange, then it's the stuff they're exchanging for that is what making them richer or poorer. So gold and silver were relatively rare, difficult to find. They didn't perish. They were durable. They could be subdivided. That is, you could melt them and turn them into coins of various weights, which represented various values. So they were, relatively speaking to the alternatives, easy to transport, easy to give change, right? If you're buying something, you want to be able to get change if you've got a high denomination. Gold is homogeneous, it's all the same. So it's homogeneous, divisible, it's non-perishable, it's sustainable, but it's relatively rare. So this is why gold made good money. This is why gold made good money in the past. Now, the system evolved because the reality of it was that carrying around gold was cumbersome. It's heavy. Carrying around gold is also susceptible to theft, particularly if you have to move the gold over vast distances, for example, for trade, international trade. So, in starting with, the establishment of international trade, which was already prevalent in Greece, and there were things called bills of exchange. There were, in a sense, these financial institutions in two different locations that had a relationship. And I could give my gold payment for your materials to institution A. They would be responsible for getting it to institution B. Institution B would be enough for them to get a piece of paper from institution A saying, yes, we got the gold, we're holding it for you. Give this person the goods that they are purchasing, and the goods would flow. So you can see how you didn't have to wait for the gold to actually get to the new person and gold to move around the economy. What you had were these bills of exchange moving around, which were basically promissory notes that the gold was in safekeeping and you will get that gold. And this is kind of the beginning of banking. And there's a sense in which these are loans. And they were discounted. That discount could be viewed as interest. As because if I'm doing the service for you, you need to pay me to do this service for you. I'm holding your gold for you, and I'll get it to you, safely and conveniently. But what really happened as a consequence is these bills of exchange now in some way become like money. I can trade the bills of exchange. Because anybody who holds this bill, well, that bank A is supposed to deliver them the money. So merchants could swap bills of exchange. They could use bills of exchange to trade goods among themselves. So you can see it's the beginning of a paper money, but the paper is not money. The paper is what we call money substitute. The paper is a money representative. It represents money. It represents the gold that's held in the vault somewhere that you can have access to, that you can use this paper to get to. And it's a massive innovation. And this was very prevalent in the Renaissance and banks like the Medici Bank in Florence and other banks in Italy. They were bigger than Medici but less famous. And Holland, which turned into the Netherlands, turned into a major banking hub. Basically, most of what they did was trade in these, trade in these IOUs, trade in these IOUs that made global trade possible. And, there's a lot of trust involved because it's hard to... It is very hard, and there were big discounts as a consequence, but it's very hard to enforce these contracts. Partially because it's global. So there's no enforcing mechanism because, one city-state is trading with another city-state. And how do I enforce stuff in another city-state? But you have to develop trust. Trust has developed. And, of course, part of that trust is fulfilling your obligations. And there's of course, profit to be made by fulfilling your obligations. If you steal, you only steal once. You never get an opportunity to steal a second time because nobody will do business with you a second time. Now, modern banking really starts, and modern money really starts with goldsmiths in Northern Europe. When people start accumulating wealth, so now it's not just trade, but people start accumulating wealth, and they have a hard time transporting the wealth, or they have even a hard time storing their wealth. Where do they put it? Dig a hole in the backyard? Do they put it in some kind of vaults in there? All of that is dangerous. People can steal it. People can take it. So what happens is they go to the goldsmiths and say, hey, goldsmiths, would you be willing to store this for me? You guys can build a serious vault. You guys can hire security. Please store this. And basically, they stored it, and the goldsmiths would give them an IOU for it. And they would hold the IOU, and if they ever needed gold, they would go to the goldsmith and cash in the IOU. Well, over time, what they discovered was that they could use that IOU to buy stuff, particularly if the IOU was denominated in small amounts rather than one big one. And they could, because the IOU could be used by anybody. It wasn't person specific. It basically said, this is an innovation, a development, the bank or the goldsmith will give X amount of gold to the bearer of this note. Not to Joe Schmo, but to the bearer of the note. So Joe Schmo could go trade with Sam Wham, and Sam Wham could take the note into the goldsmith and get his gold. So you got here the beginnings of paper money, not bills of exchange, but now it was literal IOUs, deposit slips, if you will. And over time, they became known as banknotes. Banknotes. Really, they're bank IOUs. We've got your gold. We'll give it to whoever hands this banknote to us. Now, of course, you had to protect those banknotes. You don't want to lose them because anybody could use them. But they were a lot easier, a lot more comfortable to move around, to move from place to place, to exchange, than sacks of gold. You didn't have to carry sacks of gold in your pocket. You just carry some notes, easier to protect. Now, another development happened at the same time. The goldsmiths realized that they had all this gold sitting in their vaults. And it wasn't being withdrawn that often. People were not coming and demanding all their gold be taken out. And the gold was sitting there. And yet, clearly there were people out there in the world who wanted loans, who wanted, in a sense, gold to be able to go and buy stuff or start businesses or, primarily start businesses or start a farm or start something like that. And they were sitting on all this gold, and it was kind of a waste. Why not, they said to themselves, lend this gold out to people who want to start businesses and charge interest for it. Of course, they had been charging interest from the people who deposited gold with them. They'd been charging them a fee. So if I'm the goldsmith and you want to store the gold with me, I'm going to charge you a fee. I'm not going to pay you interest. You're going to pay me because I'm giving you a service. Now, if I can use your money while it's stored with me to make loans over there, then I want to attract more people to give me their gold and to give me their money so I can make more loans out there. So maybe now I offer a free service. where you can deposit gold with me and I won't charge you anything. Or maybe I'll even give you 0.5% or 1% or whatever. And people start giving me more gold. I lend it all out. And of course, you can see that there's a bit of a problem here. Because if they're giving me the gold with the anticipation that they can withdraw it at any time, and I'm giving it out on the other side and charging interest on the other side, there could be a day where everybody wants their gold at the same time, and I don't have enough gold in my vault because I've lent it all out, or I've lent enough of it out that I can't pay you enough. And as a consequence, that's called a bank run, and a bank can go bankrupt because of that. That is a liquidity crisis. Now, bankers are pretty smart about this, and they make you sign a contract when you deposit your money in a bank that says sometimes, on occasion, they will have to tell you you cannot get your money. Immediately, you will have to wait a while. They can freeze your account for a while. And you accept that. Or not. Or you don't use the bank. So it's not fraud. It's all up front. Everybody knows this is going on. They also got smart about, we should probably keep a healthy reserve. That is, we should keep a lot of gold in the vault. We shouldn't loan it all out. If we loan it all out, we could get in real trouble if somebody comes and wants their gold back. So a kind of a market equilibrium sets in where some banks might loan more out, some banks might loan less out. That will determine how risky the bank is. But you can see now that overall, gold is not going to move much, really. What is going to move? Well, those banknotes. I come give the bank my gold. They give me banknotes. The banknote says redeemable in gold. I use those notes to buy stuff. And the bank, when it makes a loan on the other side, doesn't literally give somebody the gold. They give them banknotes. And maybe the person on the other side takes those banknotes and they deposit those banknotes with another bank. Then that other bank demands that your bank send the gold over there. They basically redeem the banknotes, and that's when the gold might move. But generally, the economy is an economy of notes, money, what we call paper money, but paper money that's all redeemable into gold or silver. And the gold and silver is moving, but it's moving in the background between financial institutions. We are not really, mostly not touching it. And this is, of course, an incredibly efficient system. It has all the benefits of gold in the sense that it's, again, durable, not perishable. There's not a lot of it. Not a lot is discovered any given year. So you don't get these floods of money coming in. Yet it does facilitate things like fractional reserve banking, which increases the amount of, during increased economic activity, increasing the amount of money in the economy, which is not a bad thing. So there is a lot of banknotes floating around, and that's what we use. And that's what the essence of a gold-backed financial system is. It's private banks issuing currency. Now, the first changes to this happen when we get central banks. Kind of the first central bank is the Bank of Amsterdam. But the first really active, the real model for central banking is the Bank of England. That was established, I think, in the 18th century. And these banks, they take it upon themselves. See, the problem with gold as money and this private system of private banks, free banking, notes moving around is there could be periods where there seems to be a shortage of money, where people have used their gold, let's say, to buy stuff from other countries. The gold has all gone to France. No new gold is coming into the United States because nobody's buying UK stuff. And there could be these movements of gold, which means money, and you could have periods in which there's less money in the economy. That might lead to price declines, just like inflation. When there's an increase in the money, but no increase in production, leads to inflation. A decrease in the money, but the same number of goods would lead to what's called deflation, a decrease in prices. Well, central banks are established in order to smooth that out. So they can kind of issue money still supposedly backed by gold, but they can like cheat for a while. Like during periods where more money is needed than the gold exists, they can print more with the idea that later on when gold adjusts, they can take money out of the economy to return to equilibrium. So the idea of central banking is the gold standard works, but it's kind of messy. And it relies on uncoordinated private individuals making decisions and private institutions making decisions. That feels uncomfortable, particularly to a statist, right? It feels like we could do better. So the way to do better is we can centralize this, organize this, and do it in a way that really smooths out the ups and downs of what's called the business cycle, of periods in which prices might be going up or prices might be going down, and credit might be available and then credit might not be available. Interest rates, for example, instead of having them set by a marketplace and they're fluctuating over time without any supervision and nobody deciding about them, now we can control interest rates. It just gives the authorities, the government, a huge amount of power, leverage over the economy. And that's what central banks are instituted for. They were instituted for the purpose of power and leverage over the markets, over the economy. What is more powerful than having control over the money when money is needed for every trade? Money is needed for every transaction. Money kind of is needed for all economic activity. Now, central banks, of course, are limited, though, because while they can cheat on the money, on the amount of money they issue vis-a-vis the gold they have, they can't cheat too much. People will discover, and if they issue more money than there is gold, they will be ultimately, those pieces of paper will devalue, will come down in value, and that will cause inflation. That is, you'll need more of the pieces of paper, more money to buy any good. It's not real money, it's money substitutes. The real money is the gold. So they have to be stealthy, it's difficult. It's difficult to do. And it's limiting. Because ultimately, you want to get it back into equilibrium, and that isn't always, that's not always how central banks want to behave. In a sense, what they want is power. They get power, but the power is constrained by the amount of gold in their vault. And if the gold in the vault is diminishing, then the amount of money circulating should be diminished. And yet they don't want it to diminish, because they want to keep the economy, they want to pretend that the money's not flowing out, that gold is not flowing out, even though gold flowing out is not a bad thing. Deflation is not a bad thing, right? Let's be clear for a minute about deflation, inflation. When it comes to prices, inflation means prices are rising. Deflation means prices are coming down. If deflation is a consequence of more goods than the number of goods is growing faster than the amount of money, productivity is increasing relative to the amount of money, or because of international trade flows, then prices going down is not a bad thing. For example, if gold is flowing out of the economy from England to France, and as a consequence of that, prices in England start going down, then the French look at prices in England and they start buying stuff from England because prices are cheap. Remember, there's a global currency. It's called gold. Once they start buying goods from England, gold flows back to England. And the more gold flows back to England, everything else held constant, of course, prices come back up. So there's nothing wrong with prices adjusting to the quantity of money that's available and to the influence of global trade. It's completely natural and completely part of the free market. But it's not what central bankers or governments want. They want stability. They want control. So they intervene, and by intervening, they create dramatic distortions. But as much as they intervene, they're constrained about how much they can intervene by the fact that they still have gold. Gold is still money. Everybody views it as money. So central bankers have a huge incentive to get rid of gold. So that they can just have the paper and forget about the real money and make the paper money. And if they can make the paper money, i.e. the paper becomes the actual means of exchange, they can print up as much as they want. They can withdraw as much money as they want. They can play around with it as much as they want. There's no limit. There's no constraints. Really, the first experiment with fiat money, that is money divorced from a commodity, money divorced from a standard, money that is just paper. The first experiments with this were I've read in China in the 13th century. A number of Chinese emperors used this. I don't know the history of what happened in China. I can imagine, but I don't know the history. But the first real experiment with this was in the West, was in France in the early part of the 18th century. A guy named John Law had a new monetary theory. Call it the modern monetary theory. It was modern back then. And he believed that central banks and governments should be unconstrained in terms of issuing money, in terms of issuing currency. And indeed, he believed that the problem with the economies of the world in the 18th century was that there was not enough money. They were being limited by the limited supply of gold. Instead of viewing money as just a medium of exchange, not as a good in and of itself. No, Law and others started viewing money as wealth. If I can print up more money, if I can print up more wealth, then I become wealthier and the economy will do better. By the way, pretty much the entire Western world is run by that view today. John Law is considered by most monetarist economists today as a father, in a sense, of modern central banking and as a hero, almost as a hero, as a genius economist. By the way, just as an aside, I see Apollo Zeus is making a bunch of membership, of gifting memberships. Thank you, Apollo. This is expensive. This is not cheap. So I hope you guys are getting memberships. Appreciate that. You should thank Apollo. I see that Jennifer also did a membership gifting. So thank you. It's a nice way to support the show and to support the people in the chat who are part of the show. It doesn't add up to the super chat, but it still does add up in a sense to the income on a monthly basis. So John Law had these theories about money. He tried to implement them in the UK and Scotland, where he was from, and England, and he was ridiculed, and he actually got into a duel, and he killed a man, and he was tried. and he was sentenced to death at the age of 23. And his friends managed to free him from jail. You know, they basically organized a jailbreak. And he escaped from jail, and he ultimately landed up in France, where he became friendly with a lot of the French aristocrats. And France was going through a very difficult time at the time. The French monarchy, Louis XIV had just died. Louis XV was still a young boy. There was a, what do you call it, when a king is too young to rule? Anyway, during Louis XIV's era, the monarchy had accumulated huge amounts of debt. And it couldn't pay them. And it didn't want to default. This is France, after all. Regency. Thank you, Mary Ellen. He was the regent. There was a regent. John Law befriended the regent and convinced him to experiment with this new form of money, fiat money. He basically got the regent to approve a bank, which John Law owned, that would have the ability to print bills of exchange that would be accepted by the government in payment of taxes and in payment of other stuff. And you could use those bills of exchange, for example, to pay for the debts that the government had. So John Law started printing money. Not initially backed by gold, but then ultimately completely detached from gold. He also started a company that initially was responsible for all the trade with the French, all trade emanating from the French territories in the United States. It was called the Mississippi Company. And Mississippi Company or Louisiana Company? Now I'm confused. I've forgotten. Anyway, one of the two. That company then landed up getting from the king the monopoly rights of all foreign trade with that France had with its colonies. And what this company did was it started issuing shares. It would issue shares to the public. The public would pay with real money. The company would use that money to pay off the debts of the monarchy while issuing more and more shares. And of course, it was all associated with this bank that was issuing all of these notes. And the idea was the notes were good because you could use the notes to buy shares. So it was like this Ponzi pyramid scheme, very complicated, very complex. But basically, fiat money was being issued throughout the French economy with the promise that it could be used to buy shares of this company that everybody wanted because its price was only going up, just like some stocks I know today. And everybody wanted it because, you know, the French government would take it. And of course, all this money was being issued. And ultimately what happened was you got two things, which you always get when money's issued like that, when interest rates are kept really, really low, is you got inflation and you got a bubble. Sometimes you get them together, sometimes you get them separate, but usually you get them together. Inflation and a bubble. The bubble was in the stock of this company, a massive bubble, and inflation was just prices started going up, just generally in the economy, because there was so much money chasing no more goods than there were before. Money, people started converting these bills of exchange into gold, and they started taking the gold out of France. The French government then banned the export of gold. That is, people were taking their money, gold, real gold, and putting it into banks in Amsterdam, where they could trust it. And as a consequence, gold was flowing out of France, and all they were left was fiat money, and fiat money was generating inflation. So the French monarchy made it illegal to possess gold. First, they made it illegal to export gold. Then they made it illegal to possess gold. And they would literally search people who were leaving the country for gold. and they would expropriate it. And this, of course, all led to the complete collapse of the system, which led to a lot of aristocrats losing all their money. It led to poor people becoming poorer. It led to a massive financial crisis, a massive economic crisis in France, which lasted for decades, and you could argue maybe laid at least the economic, if not the intellectual seeds, but the economic seeds for the French Revolution that happened, 70 years later, 80 years later. So here you got a fiat money generated, I would argue what fiat money always generates, which is inflation and bubbles. Inflation and bubbles, and it's always the case. The governments, you could argue, cannot resist lowering interest rates because the people demand it, and printing money because the people demand it, because it's easy, because you can give out political favors, because you've got wars to win or whatever. And it always ends the same, in the devaluation of the money, which means inflation, or in a bubble that then bursts and results in collapse. The first use of fiat money, by the way, John Law escaped. He made it to Amsterdam or wherever, and he lived on, and today is remembered as a brilliant mathematician, economist, who gave us the principles of modern central banking monetary theory. Nobody learns anything from history. I keep saying that. This just reinforces that fact. All right, let's see. Next point is first use of fiat money in the United States was during two wars: the War of Independence, the Confederate government. Was that what it was called? It wasn't anyway. The Union, not the Confederacy. God, that's a civil war. The U.S. government issued paper money to be used, and they promised that it would be redeemable after the war. Of course, it wasn't, and there had to be. There was massive inflation. The paper. It was the Continental Congress. It was worthless by the end of the war, and Hamilton, and I forget the name of the banker, the famous banker, had to do a lot of financial engineering to try to pay people back, to give them some value for these pieces of paper, worthless notes that they have. But after the war, basically that system where the government issues money disappeared, and the United States had a system where money was basically issued by the banking system. The government instead of a mint, you brought your gold to the mint, they issued you coins. But in terms of paper money, that was the gold was deposited in banks, and the banks would issue paper money. That existed until the Federal Reserve Federal Reserve's establishment in 1914. So the second occurrence of fiat money after the War of Independence was the Civil War, where again redeemability of paper into gold was done away with. The government issued paper money. That resulted, of course, in inflation, if you will, in the value of the money declining significantly. But once the Civil War was over, a gold standard was reestablished as a private gold standard. That is a gold standard managed by the banks, not by a central bank. All right, so this brings us to the establishment of the Federal Reserve. Up until the establishment of the Federal Reserve, with the exception of the wars, money was private in a sense that you owned gold, and you had the gold in the bank, and they issued you notes, and you used the notes as money, and the money was gold and silver. And a lot of the monetary intervention that the government involved itself in the economy had to do with the convertibility of gold and silver into one another, the ratio, and convertibility of the dollars into those. So the government still meddled but it meddled a lot less than it does today, and it had fewer tools to meddle than it has today. In 1914, basically the Federal Reserve was established. Basically, the Federal Reserve became the depository of gold. Banks still had gold and could issue banknotes, but it was the Federal Reserve now issuing banknotes, Federal Reserve notes, what we now have as dollars. Those are Federal Reserve notes. Then you had the Great Depression, which we can get into the reasons for it maybe on another show. You had the Great Depression. And as a result of the Great Depression and runs on banks and the failure of a lot of banks, the government decided to confiscate all the gold owned by Americans, individuals, and all the gold owned by banks was converted into Federal Reserve banknotes, and all the gold in the United States of America was stored by the Fed in Fort Knox or whatever, right? So it was illegal. I don't know how many people know this, but from 1933 until 1972, I think it was illegal for an American citizen to own gold. You could have some jewelry, but you couldn't own gold bars. You couldn't own gold for an investment. You could only go own jewelry. I know that's crazy, but that's reality. They literally, you could go to jail for having gold in your vault if you're having gold in your backyard. I mean, again, people think that we've lost a lot of freedom recently. We have. But we lost a lot of freedom over and over again during the last 100 years or 150 years in various circumstances. Certainly, the confiscation of all the gold from private citizens and from private bank accounts in 1933 is one of the biggest violations of individual rights in history, certainly in American history. And that is certainly authoritarian, and that was FDR's regime, and it wasn't overturned until Nixon. The U.S. went off the gold system in 1933, and it only went back on the gold standard, really. Well, it still held on to the pretense of a gold standard, but of course completely managed by the central bank. In 1944, Bretton Woods was established. Bretton Woods was an international deal, global international deal, to basically use gold as a basis for money for international trade, make gold convertible into 1 ounce, I think was $35 at a fixed rate like that. This would force the Federal Reserve to basically be run based on a gold standard. The idea was the Federal Reserve would only issue dollars based on how much gold they had. Again, $35 equals 1 ounce of gold. And this would work, the argument was, to smooth global trade. And it did. It worked magnificently. The era of globalization was started. The problem was, so this is the thing about this gold standard. Individual citizens like you and me could not convert our dollars into gold. The only entities that could convert dollars into gold were central banks. So if the French wanted to take the dollars that they had accumulated because, I don't know, they'd sold a bunch of stuff to America and gotten dollars in return, and if they wanted to convert those dollars into gold, they would go to the American Central Bank. They would give the American Central Bank the dollars that the American Central Bank printed to begin with, and the French would get the gold in its place. The assumption was that this wouldn't happen because the value of the dollar and gold would be stable. What didn't they count on? They didn't count on central banks and central banks banking cheating. In the 1960s, because of the growing welfare state, or the newly established welfare state, war and poverty, welfare, Medicare, Social Security, all of that stuff, as well as a Vietnam War, the U.S. government ran large deficits, and those deficits were funded by the Federal Reserve printing more money than they had gold. They were cheating. Gold should have been worth much more than $35. An ounce of gold should have been worth much more than $35. But it was pegged at 35. You couldn't exchange gold for more than 35, even though you should have. Gold was very valuable. So what happened is people wanted to hoard gold. Now, as individuals, you couldn't do anything about it. But the French, after all, it's always the French, right? The French figured this out. And they were like, all that gold that the Americans have is worth a lot more than they're admitting. They're keeping the value of the dollar low. They're keeping the value of the dollar high. It should be much lower because they've inflated their currency. They printed a lot of dollars, and therefore the dollar should be worth a lot less in gold. So the French started sending boatloads of dollars to New York, where the boats would unload the dollars and give them to the Fed, and the Fed would load gold bars onto these ships and send them over to France. The other allies didn't do it because America asked them not to do it because it was clear that America was in trouble. But what you had is a big flow of gold out of the US and into France. A great trade for the French, by the way. It got so bad that Nixon in 1971 or 72 basically said, can't keep this up. Basically, our gold reserves will go to zero. We can't have that. So he basically went off the gold standard completely. In 1971, he floated the dollar, which means the dollar became a pure fiat currency. It was already mainly fiat, but now became a pure fiat currency. The illusion of being backed by gold was gone. And the United States since then has had a pure fiat currency. As a consequence of the United States doing that over time, every other economy, major economy in Europe did it. Then the Asians did it. First, they didn't have it pegged to gold. They have it pegged to the dollar. And then the dollar was pegged to gold. So once the dollar stopped getting pegged to gold, a lot of currencies kept the peg to the dollar. But then once the dollar started inflating, they dissolved the peg to the dollar. And now all currencies fluctuate. Their value is determined one against the other by supply and demand, by the market. So fiat money is what we have today. It's pieces of paper that have their status as money primarily because of laws of legal tender, which say that the government accepts them as payment for taxes and payment for anything else, for loans. It also says legal tender laws say that that contracts can be paid off using dollars, using this paper. And it's acceptable that everybody uses it and everybody can use it, and it is the money. It is the money. Money is the common medium of exchange as such in the United States today and in the whole world. The dollar is money. The paper dollar is money. Not a good money. I would say an awful money. And if you ask me, as David asked, is fiat money more of a curse or more of a blessing? I would say unequivocally, that is a curse. It is awful and terrible. You saw that in what happened to John Law. It doesn't happen quite to the same degree. Our economists today and people at the Fed are more sophisticated. But at the end of the day, it is fiat money that brings us inflation. The inflation we're experiencing right now is a consequence of the fact that the Federal Reserve just printed up a bunch of money during COVID and gave it to us. And gave it to us during a time where there was a supply shock. So the amount of goods was going down, the amount of money was going up. What do you think would happen to prices? They went up. But it's worse than that. Money doesn't just cause inflation. It also, fiat money also gives the central bank And because of that, the government, huge, massive control over the economy. The government now determines how much money is going to be in the economy. The government now determines who gets that money, how they get it. Remember bailouts? Bailouts, anybody? They couldn't do that unless they had a printing press. But they have a printing press, so they can bail out anybody. The government can run massive deficits. I mean, think of the deficit in the United States, which means they can spend without thought, without consideration. It means that the Federal Reserve can, at its whim, increase the amount of money in the economy or decrease it. It can do quantitative easing, which it did through the 2000s. It can do quantitative tightening, which supposedly it's doing now, but not so much because there are problems with the banks. So they can't do too much quantitative tightening, which means inflating the money supply or deflating the money supply. It means that certain sectors can get the money, bailouts again, or just the way money flows out of the banking system into the hands of people. It means they control interest rates. Almost every economic problem, crisis, comes from a period of interest rates being too low artificially. It creates massive distortions, perversions, and misallocations in the economy. Malinvestment, as the Austrians call it. Every bubble we've seen is a consequence, and every financial crisis we've seen is a consequence of some way of fiat money, interest rates. The control fiat money allows the central bank on interest rates. The Great Depression was caused by interest rates being too low in 1925 to 1929 or 1926 to 1929. And then probably money supply being too tight in the post-1929, but that's controversial. But there's no doubt that what the government did caused the Great Depression and then sustained it in the Great Depression. All because they mismanaged money. Not the only thing they mismanaged, they also mismanaged trade, not accidentally. Trade is often related to money. It was the big anti-trade bill that Hoover passed. They mismanaged taxes, they mismanaged regulation, they mismanaged everything, which sustained the Great Depression. But a big chunk of it, the reason it happened to begin with, was the mismanaging of money. Because money cannot be managed. It cannot be centrally planned any more than any other good can be centrally planned. Money needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to respond to economic conditions. It needs to be able to respond to market incentives. It needs to be able to respond to supply and demand. And because the Fed, central bank, controls it, it cannot. It cannot. So money in the hands of a central bank is basically money in the hands of the government is unequivocally a curse as compared to, I mean, imagine food managed by the government. Imagine technology managed by the government. Imagine any industry managed by the government. And you all know, oh my God, that doesn't work. That would be impossible. That is a disaster. No, but let's give them money. Money, that's easy. That's no problem. And what you get is a disaster. So what you get is boom and busts. What you get is major financial crisis like the one in 2008, which was caused by the Federal Reserve, by low interest rates, by misallocation of capital caused by incentives created by government, which couldn't have happened if money was private and money was backed by something real. Systemic risk is systemic because we have one central bank, which affects not just the United States, it affects the entire world, the entire globe. All right, so that's fiat money. It's money that the central bank just prints. It causes malinvestment, bubbles, which are malinvestment. It causes inflation. There's another form of deflation which is very bad. Deflation of just prices going down because productivity is increasing faster than the money supply. That's good deflation. That's healthy. Wish we had more of that. Deflation caused by a massive collapse of credit, loans being called, banks not issuing any more loans, the amount of money in an economy collapsing because of economic crisis, because usually there was a bubble before or some kind of irrational expansion before, and now it's all collapsing. That is really bad. That kind of deflation is really bad. But that is what a central bank brings about. It brings about that kind of deflation. You see, during the 19th century, there was deflation, but it was a good deflation. In a sense, that was moderate, consistent over time. It meant productivity was increasing faster than we were bringing in new gold into the economy. Great Depression is a collapse of credit because businesses are collapsing, trade is collapsing. What else did I want to say about deflation? So that is all a product of fiat money. So I think it's unequivocally a curse. There is no balancing act here. The only blessing it gives is it gives the government more power, if you consider that a blessing. All right, now I am going to pause here, and I'm going to take, because we're already at like 2.5 hours, not on this topic, but for the show generally, and I don't know that I can go another hour and a half to finish this topic. So what I'm going to do is I am going to do Super Chat questions, which there quite a few have come in, although we're still way off the target. But some Super Chat is coming in, so I'll answer Super Chats. And I will, for David, who is going to listen to this over the weekend, I will pick up right here probably on Monday. I'll probably do a show on Monday just on this, without the news. I'll just do this. So stay tuned. Money, present, and its future, part 2 is on Monday. So thank you, David, for sponsoring the show. Thank you all for listening and participating. Let's go to the Super Chat. And then we'll call it an evening. But if there are people out there who have the resources and the interest in supporting the show, let's say at the $50 level, the $100 level, something like that, now is a great time to step in and get us to our target, because we're not going to get there with $5 questions. We need some big bucks here. All right, Andrew. They threaten Israel. You know what? Wait, let me change. Let me wait a minute. Let me just see quickly if there are questions on the topic, and then I'll do the general questions. Okay, it looks like Mary Eileen has it. Mary Eileen has, didn't J.P. Morgan as a private banker rescue the world economy more than once? Yes. I mean, the most famous case is 1907, where because of the government dabbling in monetary policy, even though they didn't have a central bank, they could still do that, talking about going on a silver and all kinds of politicking, forcing banks, if I remember right, to buy government debt, stuff like that, and use government debt as reserves rather than using gold as reserves. Because of that, there's a major bank crisis in 1907 that filtered from the heartland, from the small banks to New York. A number of the clearinghouses were in trouble, and a number of the big banks in New York were in trouble. Basically, J.P. Morgan, there was no central bank. The U.S. government couldn't do anything. They couldn't print up money. J.P. Morgan basically got the major bankers in New York into a room. He closed the door. He locked it. He says, we're not leaving until we're solving this. They sat there, I can't remember, 2 days or something, and they came up with a solution. And they figured out who they would bail out, if you will, who they would allow to continue to survive, and who they would recapitalize from their own money, of course, their own incentive, their own money, which is fine, and who they would let fail. And I'm sure they had, again, good reasons for those decisions because it was their money at stake. And they did that. And, the crisis petered out, and then the economy bounced back and rebounded very healthily. So private markets have mechanisms to solve these problems. They have the profit motive, the incentive of good bankers to not allow a crisis like this to hurt their business, which is what the JP Morgan's incentive was. We don't trust those incentives because those are self-interested, selfish incentives. What we need is a central bank where the leadership is not selfish, not self-interested, where the leadership is there for the common good and the public interest. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to fulfill the public good and the common interest and bail out people based on the common good and the public interest. And that we trust. We're happy to give them a lot of power. So I think it was JP Morgan bailing out the US economy and by extension the global economy that ultimately led to the establishment of the Federal Reserve, because it was intolerable to politicians and to the public to some extent, but certainly to the politicians, that a private banker would have that much power. They don't have a problem with the power. The problem is that it's a private banker who has it. They wanted that power to be, and even more power, to be granted to a, to a banker who had the public interest in mind. All right, thank you, Mary Aline. Let's see. No. Michael says, if a major economy collapse occurs while Trump is president, will he be forced to engage in massive deregulatory state shrinking policies, or will he go full fascist? It's rare, particularly on the right, it's rare when the economy collapses or gets into trouble that the response is deregulation of free markets. Funnily enough, it's usually leftist parties who do that because they tend to be, I don't know why, but that happened in New Zealand, that happened in the Carter administration, and that happened in Sweden. It was parties of the left actually who liberalized the economy in response. The exception of that, of course, is Margaret Thatcher in the UK. So I don't know what Trump would do. I have no idea. And to a large extent, it depends on who his advisors are and who he has around him. But he could certainly ramp up statism. He could put huge amount of pressure on the Federal Reserve to pump out more money. He could bail out everybody in sight. He could nationalize stuff. I mean, that's what George Bush did. Why wouldn't Trump do it? So I don't think his instincts are liberalize, free stuff up. I think his instincts are control. He's definitely going to move towards more control, less freedom. Jay says, good, thank you, Jay. $50, very, very appreciative. Appreciate that a lot. Thank you. I can't speak. This show is too long. Good deflation, Moore's Law, doubling the bang for the buck with computers every 28 months. Starting in the 1970s, it reads expected that the trend to stop due to the limit of physics, but it keeps on going to this day. Yeah, I mean, Moore's Law is amazing. The doubling of computer, the number of transistors on a computer chip every 2 years, I think it is. It just keeps going. And people keep saying, but the physics, it has to have a limit. It does, you think, have a limit, but it keeps going. Moore's Law is still around. And it's truly amazing. And that means prices of computers might stay the same, but you're not buying the same product from year to year. Every year it's better. It's faster. It's got a better chip. In every respect, it's better. So what's really happening is the price is coming down. And you see, one of the problems of our inflation numbers, CPI, is how do you measure increased quality? How do you measure the fact that computers are not cheaper, but better? It's very difficult to measure that in a CPI. And the Fed, the statistical agencies try to do it, but it's very difficult for them to do it. But if you imagine that with computers, imagine an economy in which productivity is increasing, maybe not as fast as it is with computers, but imagine it's increasing generally. Then what you would see is prices decline across the board, not just in computer, or prices stay the same, but quality increase throughout the economy. And you do see that. You do see that. There have been periods in which and the Fed fights it. The Fed thinks that's bad. The Japanese central bank thinks that's bad. So they fight it. And by fighting it, they make things much, much, much worse. And fiat money makes that possible. Thank you, Jay. Absolutely. J-Dog says, continuing with Henry Ford, in the 1920s, he proposed an energy-based currency that would be tied to electric energy production. Interesting idea. Yeah, it is an interesting idea, but you could increase energy production just to increase the currency. I mean, it creates weird incentives. Gold was a great currency. There was really no reason not to stick with the gold standard. No reason. Gold was a great money, still is, if we ever went back to it. Let's see. J-Doug says, Lynn Alden's 30-minute video on how money and banking work is the best explanation of money I've heard yet. Highly recommended. Thank you. I'll take a look at that. Let's see. Jonathan says, happy birthday, Yaron, and thank you for so many years of reason. I appreciate that, Jonathan. Thank you. All right, let's go back to Andrew. Andrew says, they threaten Israel. All the antagonists threaten it to not act, including the Western media, the ICC, the UN. What should Israel do to counter these threats? Or should it just ignore and militarily do what it needs to do? Yeah, I mean, I said this like very, very early on, the day after. It has to do what it needs to do. It needs to do it quickly. It needs to do it ruthlessly, fast. The longer it waited, the more it gave time and opportunity for the world to rally against it. If the war had been done in a month, people would have maybe afterwards said, oh, I wonder if there were war crimes committed. We should set a committee or something. But it wouldn't have affected the war. But the fact that it was dragged out 7 months, giving people an opportunity to complain and to advise and to say, oh, it's okay what you did in northern Gaza, but it's not okay with Rafah. What the hell? None of that is right. So it's all, it had to be fast and it had to be thorough. And it had to be done, and for example, they should have taken Rafah because of its connection to Egypt in the first week. That should have been the first thing they did, is occupied the connection to Egypt. They occupied what's called the Philadelphia route. And, yep, that's great. Michael, are people more altruistic in their politics than in their personal lives? Yes. I mean, in their personal lives, it affects them in that they sense guilt, but they don't act it. But politically, they vote it because it's the way to redeem the guilt. All right, let's see. Mary Benz, shout out to philosophy at work. Capitalism is exciting, but what about the poor? What about the boor? The boar? I don't know who the boar is. What about the poor? We'll do a show on what about the poor. Somebody's going to sponsor $1,000 to do what about the poor. Just a whole show, and we can make a list of all the different poor that we can think of, and then talk about what about each one of them. Mary Benz will then be happy, I hope. Michael, does the modern right think personal responsibility is dead? We have to give into need and focus more on family, values, and masculinity. I think they never understood what personal responsibility meant. They never understood how deep personal responsibility is. That it is a responsibility for your own thinking. It's a responsibility of being independent. It's a responsibility to think for yourself. It's a responsibility for your own happiness. It's a responsibility for building and creating your own soul. I think it goes against their religiosity. It goes against many of their beliefs. And I think as a consequence, they basically have indeed given up on it. And they have become tribalists and collectivists just like the left. And that is associated with family values, which they've been affiliated with for a long time. But it's only gotten worse over time. Only gotten worse over time. Mervyn says, capitalism reveals the fallacy of the broken window. But what about the door? Well, are you talking about the broken door, the fixed door, the other door? Mervyn's is just giving me a hard time. I don't, but she puts dollars with it, so that's good. It's all about making fun of the poor, or the boor, or the door, or the whatever. Philosophy at Work says, oh, now I get that. When I first saw his super chat, I didn't understand what the hell he was talking about. And now I get it. He and Meribens are doing this, they're feeding off of each other with a sense of humor that they understand and that I kind of get, and maybe you guys understand, but it is what it is, and it's difficult to completely get. All right. So this is the question. Capitalism is great for mobile people, but what about the sore? The sore, the poor, the boor, the door, the poor, boor, door. It's a joke competition rhyming with poor, but it's not quite within my wheelhouse of sense of humor. So one day when I meet Mary Ben, she will sit down and explain this to me, and I'm sure I'll have a big laugh. All right, guys, thank you. I appreciate the support. Thank you to all the super chatters. And I will see you on Monday. Monday I'm flying, so the show on Monday will be in the evening. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday will be evening shows. I'm hoping. Like, if I'm ready for this course, then I'll do a show Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. If I'm not, I might have to spend Monday and Tuesday prepping for the next day, and then you'll only get a show on Wednesday. Anyway, the shows will be in the evening. They probably won't be news focused because I won't have time to research the news. I'll be teaching all day and flying all day and all that stuff. So I will finish up the money topic next week. Yeah, I will see you all then. Again, thank you. I really, really appreciate the support. And have a fantastic weekend. Yeah, weekend. And thank you for the happy birthday wishes. And yeah, see you soon. Bye, everybody.